Benvinguts i benvingudes. Començarem la conferència amb l'Anna Pollock, referent internacional en turisme regeneratiu, que tenim la sort de que pugui participar avui amb nosaltres i esperem que disfruteu molt de la xerrada. Anna, welcome to Kerretània. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you and the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Oscar, and thank you for this invitation. I so wish I could be with you in the flesh, as they say. You seem to have a very beautiful part of the world to take care of. And from what I can understand, you're already being dedicated to that purpose. And so it's a delight to support you in this. So I have been looking at regeneration as a concept and as a powerful idea now for several years. And the more I delve into it, of course, the more complex it appears and the more powerful it appears. But I thought I would start with just a few immediate reflections before I get into the body of the presentation. And it's almost like a summary, and that is that regeneration involves a completely new way of seeing, being, and then doing. And it can affect every aspect of our lives, how we understand ourselves as individuals, our role on the planet, our purpose, how to understand our relationships with each other. It can be applied to how we run our business, our enterprise, how we live and work together in communities, and how basically how humanity functions, because the reality is what we're doing right now isn't working for us. It's causing us many headaches and many big so-called problems. I say that because obviously I've got about 40 minutes to talk with you and hopefully time for some good questions. But that clearly is can only be a superficial introduction. And if you think that you're going to get it and understand it in a few bullet points, if you like, then frankly, you're deluding yourself. This will now be a lifelong quest and adventure. And it will involve you living it. This is not something that we can just talk about only in the abstract, but it's such a new topic that at the moment it's often ideas and abstract concepts that we have to work with. And that's what I think is so exciting about what you're doing in your region, because you're going to be experimenting, testing, living and learning together. So there really is no such thing as regenerative tourism. It's become a buzzword. It's become something that has to be on every conference agenda, but it cannot be packaged and bottled, as it were, and sold in a quick webinar. So this is really where you start. You start in a place, in a region, and you've already done that starting, which is why I'm so happy to be with you. We don't think about regenerative tourism, think about regenerative places, places that are revitalizing themselves, that are coming fully back to life, and who are learning how to live in harmony with the natural world. So with that preamble, my intent today is to give you the context as to why we need to change, and the big picture of how we might change. And then I'm very pleased that Bill Reed, whom I consider to be my mentor and now my friend, is going to be sharing more ideas with you tomorrow. And from my limited conversations with Oscar and team, you have lots of expertise locally and ideas and experience that you can draw upon. So let's just look at where are we? Not just in space, you know where you are in the world, in Europe, but where are we in time? And frankly, I think this is the most exciting and actually scary time to be on planet Earth. We're probably experiencing the biggest change in the way humans see their relationship with the natural world, with each other, that's occurred for many hundreds of years. So this red arrow here suggests that this is where we are. We have one way of being on the planet, and let's call it, if you like, our industrial phase. That started in the sort of 300 or 400 years ago and reached a huge zenith, but it is now at that point where the fundamental assumptions on which it is based are proving to be inadequate, and we're realizing the consequences of living out some of those assumptions. And some other way of being on planet Earth, to be in more harmony with the natural world, is being born, and it's really at a very early stage in its emergence, in its birth. So we have to treat it with some degree of care and watch that it doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater, if I can use an old English saying. So this puts a huge amount of responsibility on each one of us. And I would suggest that we're all here to help that, if you like, that birthing process of something new that will enable us to continue, that will sustain humanity, and allow another one to decline its performed it and become compost, if you like, for the new one. So this image for me portrays what I've been seeing over the last 20 years or so. And what I see is the journey ahead. These young people, these people of all ages perhaps, that are striving up this mountain are all those who really are seeking something better, but also trying to improve what already exists. But it really is an attempt, I would suggest, in a way, sustainability is an attempt to sustain business as we know it. So they've got their heads down, they're working really hard, their intent is good, but they're heading towards essentially a cliff edge. And in other words, if we continue doing what we've always done, we are going to continue to see the major challenges we're facing worsen and worsen. But where we need to go is on the other side of this vast valley over here to this mountain on this end, which is business as it could be. So we have to see it in our minds as well before we set off on the journey. But these guys, I would argue, haven't quite realized that maybe that's really what is their true destination. And to get there, sorry, I'll go back. To get there is a process of actually not jumping off the cliff, but descending slowly downwards and crossing this plain under the fog and getting to the other side. And in that descending, we need to let go of many of the assumptions that we've been carrying on our backs all this time. So I like to use imagery when I can, it's quite powerful. And here is some more imagery. Turn on the evening news and this is what you will find. We're facing lots of so-called wicked problems, and depending on the day, one or more of these problems will probably be presented to us, whether it's drought in Africa or fires in California or in Australia, in unimaginable floods in Germany, hurricanes, etc., etc. And they're described as wicked problems. This month, I would argue, everyone's focused again on climate change. Last month, it was still about the pandemic. The reason I've put these images in these boxes is that's what our way of seeing requires us to do, or we are habituated to do, is to separate out each of these as problems and look at them individually. When in actual fact, we're now seeing they are all interconnected, interdependent, and you can't attend to one of them without bearing in mind the consequences on the other. But because we've put them in boxes, we can't often anticipate the consequences on another one of them. But the reality is also that they're not actually the main problem. Climate change has been named as the biggest problem facing humanity. That's not really the problem. All of these are symptoms. And symptoms of what is the question that you have to be asking. And I love the poet Rumi, who said that when you're looking for solutions, and right now we are a civilization, if you like, of problem fixers, where everything is about how do we fix this, fix that, and so on. How do we solve this problem? And in the process, we're often looking at the surface of things. We're looking up in through the branches, through the thicket of what seems to be very complex and complicated, when in actual fact, what we should be doing is going beneath the surface to what appears in the roots. So I'm mixing metaphors. 1 minute you'll see a forest, and another moment you might see something very different, such as an iceberg. But I'm suggesting that we need to be radical. Now, radical to some people is a dangerous word. It's sort of, implies you're going to tear everything apart. And maybe we need to, but the word radical actually means root. And until we're prepared to go under the surface, right down to the root causes, and the reason for the image of an iceberg, which is used a lot nowadays, but when I was starting to talk about this 10 years ago, it was quite new. But I was taught when I was at school, of course, that most of the problem of an iceberg is beneath the surface. But if we look at our society, this part of the iceberg refers really to what we can see, the things that change on a regular basis, the trends. And I'll tell you, after nearly 50 years of working in tourism, our sector is addicted, if you like, to trends. Every year we have a conference that says what's new and what's happening in the marketplace. I've got to get ahead of it. Tell me about the trends. And even now, I would argue that regeneration as an idea is a trend. It's being treated as the new buzzword. Everyone must have it. Everyone must put it on their agenda. And that's unfortunate, because people are not showing the same willingness to go beneath that trend and understand why this idea is emerging as it is at the moment. What are the drivers? I gave you some indication of that with all those wicked problems. We're beginning to see that they're all connected. But even underneath those drivers, what has been the root cause of their emergence, their appearance in our lives? Why is the climate changing? Why are we losing in the sixth mass extinction of all species on the planet? And in order to get to that, we find that we have to look at what is underlying them. And what is underlying them is our assumptions about how the world works and how we should behave in it. Our beliefs that we've been absorbing, and that affects our values. So I showed a picture of people climbing that mountain, if you like, with packs on their backs. And I like to think of this bundle of assumptions and beliefs and values as literally that, a bundle on our back. Another metaphor for it is the lenses that you wear in order to see the world more accurately or clearly. The lenses are, again, those assumptions and beliefs that help us make sense of our world. So what science is now telling us, and the philosophers and some of our spiritual teachers and our indigenous brothers and sisters are all telling us now the same thing. And that is the root cause of today's challenges is literally that set of lenses, that bundle of assumptions, values, and beliefs that filter all the information that we're prepared to receive, because we only receive a small fraction of what is coming at us, and that we use to make sense of the world we live in. And all of those assumptions were developed at an earlier time in human history, based on the science that was available then, but are now proving to be inaccurate, obsolete, and, as we're experiencing, unfit for the world we live in. Now, the thing with this bundle of filters, if you like, is that they're personal. Every single one of you who's listening to me this morning is probably hearing something slightly different, because you could be filtering out some of the things I'm saying or I'm going to say because they do not fit with your ideas of how the world works. Some of you will be listening more attentively because, oh my gosh, here's someone saying what I've always felt. But either way, that we have an individual profile, if you like, which sometimes can make communication difficult. But we also have a shared sense of perception. All of us are raised by parents and teachers, and then we experience it in the playground at school, and we're constantly absorbing these filters, if you like, and making them our own. You could call it a personal identity and so on, but it's certainly cultural. And this is very important because this is the first time also in human development that our evolution is cultural evolution. In the past, it was genetic, and it took a long time for some new mutation or change to survive over time and prove to be of use. But today it's happening with incredible speed. And that's why I would argue most of us every day think the world's going crazier and crazier and crazier. So Einstein was indeed right. He said, and I always quote him because I have so much respect for this man's wisdom, and many of you will have heard this before, but he said, the world we have created, the present we have created, is a product of our thinking, and it cannot be changed until we change our thinking. Now, I am stressing this, and I don't apologize for taking a certain amount of my presentation time to really talk about this need for a shift. Because if we don't do this, this is the hardest part. If we don't do this, most of our efforts, all that running around and trying to fix a problem, will not ultimately work. So we have to learn to see the world differently. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. Obviously, I'm having to encapsulate the thinking of many great philosophers and scientists into a matter of minutes and a few slides. So please bear with me on that. But the simplest way that we can explain the fundamental difference in how we see the world is to understand that literally starting in the late Middle Ages, when the birth of science and so on, but also later with the birth of the Industrial Revolution that was enabled by that new way of seeing, we've been seeing the world we live in as, first of all, as inanimate. Basically, it's a hunk of rock in space that in one of what used to be hundreds of galaxies and now is hundreds of millions of galaxies. But seeing it more or less as a machine with parts and levers that could be pulled and pushed, or were being pulled and pushed in order to continue. These parts of that machine were separate, and it was dead. I mean, to some of the early philosophers like Descartes, even animals were like machines, and he was quite happy to torture them with no feeling whatsoever, no concern, because he saw the animal as a machine, and its cries were simply the cogs in the wheel, if you like, grinding against one another. Fortunately, especially and speeded up after the last war, our science, the same scientific method that was used to determine it was a machine, has now recognized that no, the world we're living in is actually alive. And it started off by obviously recognizing that we human beings and the animals and plants that we share the planet with have one ingredient, if you like, that separates us from a dead machine, and that is we're alive. And we're in charge, if you like, of our own personal development and growth. and that we're all connected. That was the other thing. But not only are human beings, individuals and plants and so on, have this spark of life, which is a mystery in a way, how it happened. They still can't figure out exactly how it happened. But we have the spark of life. But now we're recognizing that communities and even planet Earth is operating more like a living system. In other words, it's constantly adjusting to changes that are taking place inside it, especially adjusting to what we're doing as human beings, which we're just one species, of course, but also adjusting to the distance from the sun, the intensity of the light, its position in the universe, because the universe also is in a constant state of change and flux and is expanding. And now there are a number of cosmologists that are saying also the universe is a living being that's growing and maturing, and we're all part of that. So I know that's pretty heavy for an early Tuesday morning, but I hope you have got the essentials there. I decided to add this little piece because for some people, you know, oh yeah, that's the greenies talking about the forests and the trees and the birds and the bees. And I'm not quite sure I can go along with that. But the good news is for those of us who do share these opinions is the phenomenal amount of development in our understanding from neuroscience, from our understanding of the brain. Excuse me, and I wanted to draw your attention quickly to this gentleman, Ian McGilchrist, who's now into his second book, which his first book and the second book combined are 1,500 pages of serious science. And he has identified that, of course, the brain has two halves, two hemispheres. One of the hemispheres on the right-hand side has that capacity to see holes, let's put it that way, things that are complete, the big picture. On the other hand, the left hemisphere, which he argues we've come to totally rely on, is really good at understanding how to separate the parts, how to control situations, how to focus on the detail. And for example, the science from looking even at a pigeon's brain will say the left hemisphere helps that pigeon look down at sand on the ground and identify the seed there because it's food and be able to pick it up and eat it. So a real attention to what it's going to take to survive and thrive and pick out what he needs. But on the other hand, it also has a right hemisphere, which is very busy keeping an eye on, if you like, what's going on all around him, so that he can avoid maybe the predator that's swooping down from the nearby tree. So I just put this in front of you, not for you to grasp the detail at the moment, but to suffice to say that this understanding of the left hemisphere of the brain is very much that mechanical, has fed and been fed by our thinking about the Earth as a machine. The right hemisphere is that part of our brain that can better understand the whole picture and the dynamic nature of life itself. And McGilchrist is saying that, frankly, our entire systems are overusing this side and are under-listening to this side, the right side. So essentially, you end up with these two very different ways of looking at the world. One wants to define everything and break it into parts. I'm constantly being asked, can you define regenerative tourism and compare it with sustainability? And as if I can produce, this and that. And once you do that, you realize you can do it, but it's not actually as helpful as people might think. This machine-like thinking wants us, as I say, to define everything, but defining means confining. It sees things as separate from one another, and it wants more and more of whatever it has, whereas the living systems approach is the complete opposite. Instead of nothing but, it's everything and it's wholes. It's about pulling things together, integrating things, because this is how life works, and so on. So, as I say, this is an introduction, but without this framework, I don't know really how you can understand the kind of other detail that will follow from me, other speakers, and Bill himself. So let's just have a quick look at what is the output of this machine-like thinking. And I want to show you very quickly 3 pictures. Normally, I would be able to ask you to respond to a question. But first of all, just think, what is this a picture of on the right-hand side? Some people answer immediately, which I find interesting because it is a prison, but most people haven't been in a prison. What is the second picture? Oops, let's see how we do this. This, I think most people have correctly identify as a hospital, a bit cleaner, maybe a bit brighter paint than a prison, but look at the same, exactly the same shape, the boxes, the corridor, the lines, the separation, and then down on the next one, let's go again. Oh dear, there we go, using the wrong key. And what is this? Well, this is familiar to all of us who travel. There's one right outside the door. I'm in a box right now called room 828 in a hotel in Slovenia. And this is your typical corridor of most hotels. And the key thing is, what do they have in common? And I'll speed up a little bit here. But the first thing is, obviously, they're absent of people. The people are confined into their boxes, especially if they're behaving as prisoners or sleep as guests or whatever it might be, or hopefully not dead in the hotel, but in the hospital. But anyway, so there's an absence of people. There's a complete absence of anything that looks like it's a living thing, a plant or an animal, and it's devoid of life, I would argue. And this is one of the challenges of our current industrial model. It does tend over time to suck life out of everything, and to suck life, also suck us right up into our heads, into abstract ideas, things that we can measure, things that are numerate, but aren't necessarily things that are pulsing with life and all of the intelligence associated with that. So you're probably wondering, what on earth has this to do with tourism? Well, it has everything, because basically the current model of tourism, the model that generated mass tourism, and that sort of reached a crescendo in 2019 prior to COVID. Interesting that COVID should turn up at that point. But nevertheless, really is a form of tourism that emerged only alongside the widespread industrialization that was going on. In post-war, we took our business models from the business schools that were designed around a manufacturing process, the particularly mass production of cars and fridges and machines and white goods and so on. So all of our models for that so you can see how that is reflected in the change of language. It's worth having a look at that when you get the slides, I think. And as a consequence of this particular way of seeing, we've broken, or the right word to use is, we have reduced everything to parts, and in order to study the part, and we've reduced the parts to smaller parts, to smaller parts, to smaller parts. And we've done that in tourism as well. We've divided into airlines, hotels, and even hotels into their different types of accommodation. We've divided our customers into segments, into markets, and we've put everything we're doing into boxes, or boxes of function. I'm in marketing, you're in development. And you can see that that has built walls between us, built silos that we now have to change. So getting more into the journey of regeneration, I'm sorry that I'm going to just not get all this up there at one time, but excuse me. Essentially, if you want to understand where we are right now and where we're going, if you look along this axis, it's how business has changed. Sorry, I'm missing a few things. So the orange line is showing us how business has changed since the war. We have been, even before the war, in terms of humanity, we were extracting things from the ground, making, processing, selling them, and then discarding the waste. So an awful lot of business has been around extraction. And some would argue even tourism is around extraction. You have the visitor going along a conveyor belt and you're extracting value from them as they arrive in your destination. Various elements of the industry extract value, give value back, but basically extract the money, and then we send the visitor home. Over time, however, we began to realize that, oops, we're causing some problems here. It started with people like Rachel Carson in the 1960s, and we need now to try and undo the harm we've done. This term arrest disorder is from one of the leading thinkers in regeneration, Carol Sanford. But you could argue that this is when sustainability emerged. It was about reducing our footprint, reducing our income, our impact, I should say. And that's where we are now, which is getting ever more capable, we think, at trying to do these reductions in impact. Unfortunately, it's not kept pace with our growth. And even now, after COVID, we're finding that things have not slowed down as much as they should have in that respect. But if you can see this part, if you like, of the diagram is really all about generating a start, and we're trying to reduce the amount we're degenerating. But that's not going to be enough, is it? That's just the edge of the cliff here, is right here, the picture I showed you before. Now, then there's the cliff, a big chasm, if you like. And what does that represent? This represents that fundamental shift in thinking that we have to go through in order to be able to move into a new way of being on the planet, not as extractors, but as stewards and as partners. And so what you're just now starting to see is the restoration movement, where vast tracts of land are now being restored because we have enough ecological knowledge and the technology and the money to restore them. So there's some fantastic stories coming out of just how quickly nature will heal if we give her the chance. And beyond that, once we have really absorbed this new way of thinking, this new way of being as an informed partner with nature, then we can talk about regeneration. So regeneration for me is still a goal. There are no regenerative destinations out there. There are destinations with some regenerative activity. There are virtually no purely regenerative hotels, for example, but they have regenerative like projects. And I ask you to bear that in mind, because if anyone stands up and says we're a regenerative destination, I feel confident in saying that's pure greenwash. So how do we make this movement, this shift, and get over that, down through that chasm, if you like, and up the other side? And that means we have to find an experienced teacher. And the biggest guide is what Gregory Bateson said here, which is we have to learn to think the way that nature thinks. So, so regeneration, when you get right down to it, implies that we are thinking now as nature thinks, and and behaving in the way that nature behaves. And the purpose and the whole essence of being alive is not just realizing your own individual potential and developing, but creating the conditions for the life that's all around you to thrive and flourish as well. And it means that we're going to have to learn from nature how to do that. Why? Well, nature's been doing it for 3.8 billion years very successfully. Obviously, not all species have survived. They are part of the pattern of learning by doing, as it were. And something only like 1% of species ever on the planet are alive today. So they're the survivors, and they can be great teachers. So regeneration involves partnering with nature from a very sort of humble perspective, not trying to control nature or implying we know better, but working with nature. So regeneration has three key assets. It's a new perspective. It offers a new set of principles that we can live by. And only then does it really start to develop in each place differently a new set of practices for how we make it happen, as it were. So again, some people think that regenerative tourism, regeneration is peculiar to tourism. Actually, that's not the case. We're coming at this very late. We're very young in our understanding, which sectors have been actually more active, I would argue, is agriculture. And even there, it's been understood regenerative principles, how we learn from nature, how to raise plants in a way that improves the soil, doesn't reduce its fertility. That's been going on for about 20, 30 years, and only now is capturing people's attention. You'll see lots of references to regenerative agriculture. There's also a whole body of knowledge being developed right now called regenerative economics. It's very similar to ecological economics. It's being used by some placemakers for regional development and city development processes, health education as well. They all have one thing in common, and that is that they are essentially life affirming. They're using nature's design principles to change. So again, when I'm working in tourism for a long time, I never used the word regeneration. I simply started to share what I was learning about how the natural world worked, how, for example, a forest worked, and put out the question, if our destination were to act like a forest and not like a conveyor belt, how would we do things differently? What would be the sign of success? In a forest, it's flourishing. It has a diversity of plants and they're all very healthy. What would that look like in a destination? So to move along this path, we have to start to ask nature questions. How does nature do things and what can we learn? Fortunately, there's a vast sum of knowledge developed over literally 20 years in the subject of biomimicry, and we're getting fantastic information from nature because we're asking the right questions. There's a whole set of principles that we've now identified thanks to the work of these biomimicists, as they're called, that tell us that nature has very few but very powerful principles that guide the evolution of life over billions of years and in multiple kinds of ecosystems that have emerged as a response. And again, we can share these with you, all of you, but and Oscar and probably is very familiar with them. This is coming from Biomimicry 3.8. So you can see that around here the fundamental principles, for example, adapt to changing conditions, be resource efficient, no waste, be locally attuned. You know, if you're a desert plant, you've got to live in a desert. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's obviously a little more complicated than that. The second question that I like to ask when we were looking at a forest was, how does nature define success? I've been working with destinations, tourism destinations with success was literally more people coming this year than last year. And again, I'm not able to go into these in detail. You'll have a couple of days. I hope that you can explore them. But the key thing is that it allows each part, each element in a system to be self-organizing. It's incredibly abundant. That's something else to bear in mind, and has no waste. It's adaptable. It's always learning. It's creating the conditions for other life to exist. These are the kind of ways of thinking. And when you look at a living thing that's being successful, what words do you use? And I think words like thriving and flourishing are more appropriate than, you know, growing at so many percentage points a year. So what I'm doing right now, and I'm not going to go through all of these in any detail, is I'm taking this understanding from regenerative agriculture, biomimicry, and other sources, and there are many, to identify what are the key principles that will govern how we live and practice tourism. And these principles, as I said, can be used as individuals and communities and businesses. So let's just look at three of them. The first and most important one is that because things are not separate, they are everything in life is utterly interconnected. Every single element, from the cell to the person to the community, all has an impact on every other one. It's important to understand those interconnections, those relationships, and the rules of good relationship in the natural world, which is very much give and take. It's reciprocal. It's, I can only be healthy if I'm helping the system I'm in, the community I am, become healthy. But wholeness as a principle can be applied at the personal level to say, you know, I'm not just a brain, I'm not just a mind. I have feelings, I'm an emotional body, I'm a physical body, and I'm a spiritual being as well. And taking that idea of wholeness into how we work with people, how we interact with our customer, how we take care of our employee, how we take care of the other living things in our system, recognizing that everything is nested and integrated. And again, if you look at a destination, for example, it is not a hierarchy of boxes, it's a dynamic network. And what can we learn from our understanding of networks and relationships to make sure that's healthy? How can we make sure that there are enough connections between people, that there is a reciprocal exchange, etc.? And I'm just threw this together literally in a half an hour before the presentation, because I'm currently spent yesterday at the European Food Summit, which was looking at food and wine in Slovenia, and how to link, you know, the work of chefs. Well, the chefs are very interested in how to get access to more local produce, to respect the terroir, the sense of place that they're working in, and produce a bit, and so on. And so it had a focus very much on chefs and farmers. But again, it revealed, in a sense, this pervasive fragmentation, because they, you know, were coming up with issues that the chefs on their own couldn't solve, the farmers on their own couldn't solve. They hadn't actually, even though it was supported by the Slovenian tourism people, hadn't really taken into account the tourism bodies, in other words, not just the chefs, but the accommodation providers, the people that brought the visitor into the community and so on. And what was invisible in the entire day, and it was a very, very full and exciting and informative day, the words biodiversity, climate change, and soil were not mentioned once. So it was as if this whole part of people's consciousness, what's, if you like, out there, or what is it, the physiological environmental part, was never mentioned. And I thought that was very telling. I'm not being critical, but it just shows you how siloed we can be. So I'm aware that I'm up to 42 minutes, and I'd like just to spend the last 5 at the most. I hope that's okay, Oscar. If it isn't, shout. And just talk a little bit more about these other 2 principles that we need to apply, because I don't want to steal Bill's thunder. He'll be coming after me tomorrow. But people say to me, well, where do I start? And usually my answer to that is, you start with yourself. You start really having a look at that bundle that you're carrying, and what do you assume, and what is going on inside of you in terms of what you think is important and how things work. A lot of people want to rush out in tourism right now and save the planet. Well, I think that's crazy. None of us can save the planet because it's too big, and you get discouraged very quickly, and you have a tendency to assume that someone else is not, pulling their weight, as it were. But what Bill says here is really important. He says we need to work in places, and you're already doing that, so I don't really need to make this point very much more firmly. By focusing on your particular region and the communities or villages and areas within your region, and starting there, you will have a much greater chance of success, because it's when people care, and you usually care about the place that you feel at home, and you have that sense of belonging and connection. And hopefully, you know, the people that you say good morning to every day, where you have a sense of safety. That's where you can really start to begin that process of revitalization, if you like. Because it's place that makes us feel rooted. It's this doorway into caring. And when you get right down to it, what is regeneration? It's actually about each one of us caring enough in developing our own personal health and well-being, and that of those that we live with, and the plants and animals that we share the planet with. So it's when we're rooted in a place and we experience it and we have that sense of belonging and caring, that's when it happens.
Anna?
Yeah. Would you like me to stop?
Anna?
Yes. Hello? Someone's saying Anna, and I'm trying to respond. Hello? Okay. I'm confused at the moment. Someone can send me a text message. If you'd like me to stop, just WhatsApp me and say stop, or I'll carry on just for 2 more minutes if possible. The key thing is that
Anna?
yes, can you hear me, please? Yeah.
Anna, you hear us?
Yes, I do. Would you like me to stop?
Yes. Sorry, we lost you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We lost you just for a half minute.
Okay. Shall I go back? So I've got a couple more minutes, have I? All right.
Just 1 moment, please.
Can you hear me?
We were at the other one. Yes, this one.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were at what really is regeneration?
Yes, but please, 1 moment. We are putting you again on the screen, big one.
Okay. This one?
We already saw this one.
Okay. All right. Okay, shall I go from here?
Yes, just wait a minute, please.
Yeah, no worries.
I will tell you when we are ready.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, Anna.
No, that's all right.
Everything was super okay, but suddenly something happened on the computer.
Okay.
Anna, we are just changing the computer.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
I hope in just 1 minute we will be ready again. People now is taking a breath. That's cool too. A break.
No problem.
But we are all here.
I got some water.
We are almost there.
That's all right. I feel for you. Gave me a break.
Dear Anna, we are ready.
Okay.
Just give us 10 seconds.
All right.
We are ready, Anna.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're back again. I was just explaining some of the key ways to start and pointing out that everything has to be done in place in a community, ideally of people who have a real sense of this being home, that they care for it, because that's where you're going to find the motivation and the will to make some of the changes that need to be made. We can't talk about that in the abstract. It comes down to ordinary people like you and me rolling up our sleeves and learning to listen and work together. And it's because when we're rooted in a place, when we come to love it, that's really the energy that unleashes that will to make those changes. When we come to see that we share this place, it is the commons, we then have the right to call ourselves a community. And another great thinker and leader in this space is Margaret Wheatley, who said there's no greater change than when a community discovers what it cares about. So we have to start by discovering what we care about. And that starts in small conversations and grows from there. So today is a small conversation, in effect, of what you envision and what you want for your region. The second real change that happens when you apply these design principles is you have to say, what's it all about? What is life's purpose? And I use the example of an oak tree, which starts off with literally thousands and thousands of little acorns that it sheds every autumn and are spread around by various animals. I also understand that, again, unless those acorns get a bit of a crisis in their lives, in other words, a frost, they don't ever germinate. So again, there's something we can learn from that people often don't change until they're forced to change. And the pandemic, in my opinion, was nature's way of saying, wake up. It was the frost for the acorn. It was the incentive for the humans to realize they had to change. But then the acorn, each of which is unique. That's the other thing. Each of which has its own distinct personality and essence, if you like, and its potential. And some are able to fulfill that potential and become seedlings, and seedlings grow into trees. The point I want to make here is that when you get to the oak tree on the right, you don't continue growing and growing and growing in height. You grow in complexity. You grow in your capacity to provide the conditions for other life to thrive. So look at your own life as you get older and think, to what extent am I'm a quote elder now. To what extent am I creating conditions for others to survive? That should be the prime occupation. We also looked at the slide before, but again, in this context, you can see how nature defines success and what nature's purpose is. And as I said, the oak tree is the perfect example of that. It is to flourish. It is to create opportunities for other life to flourish. And so the question from a place is, how can we develop this place so that it creates more habitat, not just residences for people, but more opportunities to grow businesses and raise families and live healthily. In tourism, this is a really important point, because we've spent the last 50 years or so asking our various politicians and our people to say, support us, we're good, we produce income, foreign exchange and jobs. We've been basically asking this question, what can the country do or the region do for us? When the real question we have to start asking now is, what can tourism do could contribute to the health and well-being of the place we live in? How can we demonstrate that we're bringing net benefit, not just gross benefit, but net benefit? So regeneration is not about just less and suffering. It's about having more of the things that we have learned, particularly after COVID, really matter to us. More health, more vitality, more harmony, more opportunity for more people. That is really the kind of growth that we're talking about. And to do that, we need to develop, which is our capability as human beings, to live together effectively. And as a consequence, our role on the planet is shifting from extracting and taking and being that superior species that seems to know it all, to becoming the species that recognizes it may be keystone species, but what comes with that is a responsibility to create the conditions for life to thrive. So I've gone very quickly through these different principles as fast as I can. And suffice to say that I mentioned before, I want to try and work on this in Slovenia, where they've got, like your region, a very healthy farming community, a strong hospitality community that's really gone green more than many others, but now they need to sort of find a way of linking them together and helping farmers to accelerate their movement towards those practices which enrich the soil and create a good, healthy base for plants to grow. we've worked in Flanders. That's where I started, as I said, asking the question, what does it mean for this community to flourish? And this picture of the tree was the metaphor that the Flemish people came up with by themselves. And they now have redefined themselves in the tourism sector as place keepers or place stewards. We had a similar kind of conversation going on right now in New Zealand. They had a major task force. We did a program with 100 participants called Back to Life, which was introducing these ideas. And again, the image, the metaphor that's emerging in New Zealand, almost of itself is, and embedded in the Maori philosophy, is this image of a tree. So I was going to stop it here, and I am going to stop it here because I was into my 45 minutes before the little break there. I'm over back to you, Oscar, to determine what next, because we are now on the top of the hour at 11. And I suspect that you need to move on to the next element on the program. So could you give me some guidance now? So I can't see any.
We have 10 minutes, let's say.
Yeah, I'm okay. Well, yes, I can't do any longer than that because I had another appointment. But yes, I'd be happy to take some questions. That would be fantastic. And catch any questions during the course of the next 2 days. I'm traveling back to England, but I'd be happy to send them back to you by email or have a quick meeting later in the week.
Anna, she's asking that you said that there is not such a thing as a regenerative tourism, but that she would like to know, you also said that there is a regenerative projects. She would like to know how she could start doing regenerative tourism here in the region if there's not such a thing as regenerative tourism.
Okay, can she hear me?
Yes, she can hear you.
Okay, I'm answering the question about there's no such thing as regenerative tourism. This is because our old way of thinking wants to fix something that's fairly solid and come up with ways of defining it. It is this, it's not that, it is this, it's not that. It is, what it is the application of regenerative thinking to a situation, to a person or a community or even a project. So you can start by looking at, let's say, first of all, I would ask you to start by trying to understand a little better, and I don't expect anyone to know this a lot because there's very little literature out there. Okay, I'm going to But the most important thing is really to understand what some of those principles are. First of all, to look at your project that you have in mind and look at it within the context of the project. So is it related to the community? You know, all projects are related to the community. So what is its purpose? Does it have this purpose of revitalizing or developing some capability within the community? You see, it's hard to answer these questions without knowing the specifics. So you can start, of course, but what I'm trying to get people to understand is that you don't start by doing, you start by seeing differently. You start by seeing that project as, if you like, an energy infusion to revitalize an aspect of the place and the business, if it's a business that you're working in, and having the capacity then to see the implications of that intervention or that project on multiple facets of the community, and being able also to see the connections of various elements in the community that you might not have considered before. So you become much broader in your scope, you're more inclusive in your style. I can't just pull out a prescription like you get from the doctor, do this and take that and do this and you'll be regenerative, because you have to start with this new way of thinking, and that starts from inside. That is one of the good reasons for working on these projects, not on your own, but working again in a community. So my suggestion, I don't know exactly where you're at. I know you've got people like Oscar and others who are well-versed in this and can act as, if you like, and you can become a little nursery and support one another. But to do it on your own, in a sense, violates the understanding we're talking about here. No one is alone and no one is separate from anyone else. I hope that begins to answer your question. There's a lot of, a tendency we have with the old way of thinking to say, let's do it. None of this talk fest, we've had enough of that. We just have to do it. And that, I would argue, has got us into a lot of trouble. So may not be the answer you wanted, but I hope it was an answer that was helpful.
One more question, Anna?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I can't hear anything, so it's very difficult for me to know whether I've been, whether I should shut up completely.
Okay, we'll do one more question. Okay, then that's it. There's no more questions.
I didn't like the answer to the first one. Okay, well, it's very difficult to do these Zoom things this way. I hope that it's been helpful as a context to start your event, Oscar.
Yes.
Because I understand you have many people in your community that do understand this. So it for them it will be elementary, but for the newcomers, hopefully it provides a useful frame.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. People, it's celebrating you, and everyone was like, it seemed very happy for the presentation that you did.
Thank you, Oscar. We'll have a chat later, but we both have to leave it now. Okay, take care.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. That was great.
No, ha estat superbé. Ens anem superbé de temps. Sí, sisplau, tu mateixa, Cesca. I que després vagin al taller, Ja està, superbé. La gent està tancada, no ha marxat la gent.